Are you trying to dominate your fantasy football league? Do you want so many championship rings it's impossible to sign autographs? Well, crack open a beer, pour yourself a glass of bourbon, and settle in, because you've come to the right place. Welcome to Hammercast.
Welcome to the Hammercast Network, and on this special episode of Dynasty Debate, we got John Camacho back again because he just loves coming on and debating us here, and we're going to be talking about Dynasty trade value for the wide receiver edition. So if you're in Dynasty leagues right now, what we're looking at is, some wide receivers out there that, what are their values? So we're going to include real-life trades that have happened in Dynasty leagues. We're going to talk about film, stats, what we see from these guys, and just go into them, and we're just going to say, hey, do we want to buy these guys? Should we be selling, holding? What are we doing with these guys? So, John, thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is going to be a fun one.
So the first guy we're talking about is Henry Ruggs, the third. So Henry Ruggs, he burned a lot of fantasy managers this last year. I saw him in Dynasty leagues that he was getting taken in the late first round, sometimes middle of first round based on his draft capital. Obviously, the first receiver taken, the Raiders, how fast he is, all that. He actually finished at 94th overall in PPR formats, and he basically averaged about 6 points a game. And that definitely was inflated by his one game he had against the Hail Mary against the Jets, where he had 15 points, but that was his Hail Mary catch at the end of that game. So what are we doing with Henry Ruggs?
Yeah, so I think this is because, look, if you're buying a Henry Ruggs, like if you're buying a Henry Ruggs, it's based completely on possibility, right? You're hoping that he grows as a receiver, grows into this offense, gets a bigger portion of the offense. He's not just used as a downfield threat, which I feel like is the majority of what they did with him. I mean, it felt like Aguilar was the wide receiver running the interesting route, and you just had him on the other side just going go. I thought he could do more than that in college. So it's really, truly based on what do you think you're getting for him. So I think it's true. I think I would trade on hype if there's somebody who's hyped around him and is betting on the value that he had last year. He doesn't have that much value, as much value as he did last year, because we've seen a year in the NFL and it wasn't pretty. You mentioned it. I mean, look, we did our Just the Tip show where we talked about prop bets and things like that every year. What did I say? Almost every single week. Every single week, it was like he was at about 30 yards, and I was like, man, take the under. You're going to win more than you're not. Yeah, he might hit that big one, but he's only done it twice this year, and like you know what I mean? I won more money than I lost doing that. I definitely lost a couple times, but it was 30, 35 yards every single week, and he constantly went under that. So if you can get premium value for him, I do think you trade him. I do think you move on and you say, hey, this Raiders team, at least in the John Gruden era, we haven't seen a legit wide receiver come out of there fantasy-wise. Yeah. We haven't seen, really even I felt like their running back was underused a lot of times for fantasy purposes from where I was expecting at the beginning of the year. So you kind of get to the point where it's like, all right, does John Gruden just not like us in fantasy? And that happens. Some teams are like that. Right. Same reason you don't really want a Patriots running back. That can happen. If that starts to become the narrative, hey, maybe trade them before that narrative comes around. I think this is going to be a big year for Raiders players in fantasy football as long as John Gruden's there, because it hasn't really been pretty. It hasn't been fun owning a Raiders player in a while now. Yeah. And look, Henry Ruggs should be different. Like they talked about before the year, are they going to give him the Antonio Brown playbook? Are they going to open up the playbook for him? They didn't in year one. Maybe they do in year two. What do you think?
Well, so a couple things that make me feel like he could be a buy is Nelson Aguilar's contract's up. Yeah, he signed a 1-year contract, so maybe they put him in that role, right? I think they like him, though, and I've also heard them talk about trying to go on the free agent market and grabbing receivers, so you always got to worry about that. I saw Juju get mentioned with them. I saw some other guys get mentioned there, so I get a little nervous about that. But Aguilar is gone, maybe. So you're contemplating, hey, is that going to happen? They got to get him more involved. I think the thing that worries me is there's a couple numbers that popped out when I saw it. First of all, he never had more than 5 targets in a game. Never had more than 5 targets. That's scary to me because the guys like him should be getting 8, 9, 10 targets, bubble screens, any type of end arounds. He's got to be getting more involved, and he just wasn't. I thought he'd be used more in the rushing game just because of his speed and his ability, kind of like Tyreek Hill. They get him involved in sweeps and those type of things. And he had 12 yards rushing was his longest rush this year. That scares me. His targets scare me. He only had technically 43 targets. He got injured a little bit. He was out for a couple of games. And again, he just didn't look dominant, right? And so that's the thing that kind of makes me nervous the most out of him. I think you hit on the head with his value. So you're either going to try to buy him from a guy that's just sick of him being on his roster because he used that high draft capital and used it. If I drafted him with high draft capital, which I did not draft him with high draft capital, but if I did, are you going to sell him now and take a hit? But if he doesn't do anything next year, he's not going to be worth anything. He could be one of these receivers that he just gets stuck, like a Paris Campbell. He gets hurt all the time. A guy that's just going to kind of, J-Job from the Philly Eagles. Like we talk about him in that category. So for me, I get nervous. I think he's a hold unless you believe he's done. I don't think he's an active buy for me unless the price. So if we're looking at price, and this is what we want to give you guys, real trade values here. So in single quarterback right now, he went straight up for Robert Tonyan in a non-tight end premium league. That's an interesting deal. What do you think about that? Who would you rather have in that deal?
There's no way I would trade him for Tonyan. No, I would hold on to Ruggs. Yeah. I think you can get a lot more for him. That feels like a guy who's just fed up and expected more year one. That's a huge no go for me.
And these are all PPR. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about PPR. Here's another one I thought was an interesting one: Brandon Ayuk for Ruggs and the 2.2.
Dang. Yeah, I'll be 100% honest. I'd rather have Brandon Ayuk. I'm a little bit surprised at the value. I thought Henry Ruggs would have more value. I really did. I thought, because there's enough times where you see wide receivers have that big jump from year one to year two, to where I would think that there's still going to be people that are going to buy based off of that. If that's the value where you're having to give up a 2 and Ruggs for Brandon Ayuk, I think apples to apples, yeah, I'd probably do it. But I probably want more than that for a guy who has the potential that Ruggs has.
Yeah, it's weird. I would take Ayuk in that deal all day, but I think it's sad that you have to give up another asset when you probably you definitely drafted Ruggs a round earlier than Ayuk the last draft, and now you're giving up another additional asset. That makes me nervous. And an interesting one that I liked was Ruggs in a third for Aaron Rodgers. So this is single QB.
Yeah,
I guess if you're trying to get rid of Rodgers, right, and it's kind of just whatever, and you get Ruggs back, I don't know. I don't know where I'd have in that one.
Yeah, I think obviously you'd want to have some kind of quarterback and at your disposal, but I look at the quarterback position. You don't know how long Aaron Rodgers has the Packers, and so I'd probably go Ruggs in a third over Aaron Rodgers. I think but I get the value there for both sides. That makes sense.
Yeah, and then when you go to Superflex, the thing I like about Superflex is values fluctuate. So you're talking about, hey, I'd want more for Ruggs, and it's funny because the first trade that just happened, this just happened recently, Julio for Ruggs and a first, 2022 first. So not this coming year, but next year's 2022 class. That's an interesting deal. I think the first is enticing. So if that was a second, I would probably want Julio, but giving up a first for Julio right now, I think he's got one more productive year left. I may side with the Ruggs deal. I don't know if I'm crazy. Am I crazy there getting Ruggs in a first?
If I own Julio, I'd trade him for Ruggs in a first. Yeah, because I feel like you're getting two young guys. You're trading a guy who, his downward swing has happened. I feel like we can say that he's a Hall of Famer. He's going to have great years ahead of him. He's still going to have 1,000-yard seasons. But he's also a guy who's going to disappear a couple times a year, and that can always be frustrating as well. I would make that trade. That might just be my aversion to Julio Jones in fantasy. Love him, all-time great wide receiver as a player, but in fantasy, I very rarely hit on those big weeks and always got burned on the bad weeks. So that's how it's gone for me.
So I think a value is important here, and I want to hear your thought because I think Ruggs' value is a second-round pick. I really, in Superflex leagues, I feel like that is where he's at right now. Would you give up a second for Ruggs?
Yes, okay. I would. I think I would, because to me, Henry Ruggs is equivalent to, I would say, in this wide receiver class of where you can get, I think he's equivalent to like a Terrence Marshall, maybe a Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. I think I'd probably rather have those two guys ahead of Ruggs at this point, based on potential and possibility, and that's always the upside. But I think in the second round, all four of those guys are probably gone. So yeah, I'd probably take Ruggs over a Bateman, over a Rondell Moore. I would take Ruggs over all of those guys. That next tier of wide receivers by my assessment. So I think that's just me. But yeah, I would rather have Ruggs there.
I think I would take Moore and Bateman. Probably. I think the good comp for me is Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think that's a better kind of valuation for me personally. Would I rather have Amon-Ra St. Brown from USC, or do I want Henry Ruggs? And as much as I love Brown, it's hard for me to say the Ruggs thing. That's, I think, where his value is perfectly at. Who would you rather want as a player? That's going to be landing spot determining right now. So if you're giving Webb a second, what is that? I worry about Carr. Is Carr the answer? What are they going to do there? So I'm probably holding. If I can trade a late second for Ruggs, yes. If it's in the top 5 of the second round, I'm probably not going to do it. I think I would stay, hopefully get those other wide receivers that maybe drop and wait. But then that's just dependent on my draft. I'm not trading draft picks yet right now anyway. But if I was going to, that's kind of where my assessment would be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect way to put a bow on. I absolutely agree.
All right, so now our next guy. So Ruggs, for us, it's basically value dependent in your league. But again, I think his value is at a second round, so you take that with what you want. Okay, it kind of just depends on what you think of him at that point. Our next wide receiver is someone who is actually my wide receiver 12. So I actually am really high on him, probably higher than most guys, and that's Deontay Johnson. Some guys I've seen that I respect think he's going to be out of the league in the next couple years because of his drops and his ability. I think that's stupid. But you know what? He finished as wide receiver 21 in PPR leagues this year. So he averaged about 14 points a game. He had some big games. He definitely had some drop issues. So there are some things about Deontay that definitely are in there. So we're going to go over Deontay now. And in terms of kind of what we saw from last year, he's on a team that I think is going to get better because I think that Juju's going to move on. So I think he's going to get more targets and he can kind of be that guy. But what do you think of Deontay?
On the move now, throwing for the end zone.
That's my bad. I don't think I did that.
Fine.
Either way, so as far as Deontay Johnson goes, I think it's a really interesting conversation. You said 12. I don't think I would put him that high, mainly because I think the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver core, or at least the main guy, is still Chase Claypool for me. I think that's the guy that like you want to have, and the Deontay Johnson's going to be the number 2 to a Chase Claypool. Can be a really, really good 1 and 2. I really like Deontay Johnson. I don't want to take anything away from him, but I think top 12 would be a little high for me, a little bit too sweet for my taste. But you know, I do think Juju Smith is obviously going to be gone. I think he has some significant value because I do think he is on an upward trend. The only real negative you can say is his drops, and that bugs me. I hate drops. I hate drops, especially as an NFL wide receiver. Like, I'm allowed to drop balls in flag football. You're not allowed to drop balls in the NFL. That's dumb to say, but you know what I mean. So when you look at him, he had a pretty good year this past year. You know, had 88 receptions on 144 targets, 923 yards, just under 1,000 yards. And I do think, like you said or you alluded to, he could have a blow up game. He could have 1,500 yards next year, and it wouldn't surprise me. It'd be awesome. Yeah, I think you got great value for him, but it wouldn't shock me at all. So I think you can. I think you should get really good value if you're willing to trade for him or trade him. And if you're going to trade for him, you can win that trade in a lot of different ways. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in perspective for me, I give up a first for Deontay Johnson. I have no problem giving up a first for him. In single QB, I'm giving up a first. I don't really care. Super flex, I'd probably be over a top 5 in that era, just because if I need a quarterback. But you know, when I looked at him and just his numbers, when you look at it, he didn't have the greatest year. I think Big Ben didn't. Big Ben, the one thing that worries me is Big Ben and where do they move on, right? So we're talking about Dynasty now. What is that quarterback situation going to look like? He had a ton of targets, man. He had 144 targets this year. And again, not the longest. So when you look at his breakouts, you know, he had 40 yards a couple times. I think he had 4 games where he had 40 yards or more. The targets, and he can score touchdowns. And I think his red zone targets, he had 7 touchdowns this year. They looked for him in the slot. I think he'll move around a little bit more if Juju does leave. I think his value increases because I think those targets are going to be there. But I think they're going to be able to use him in different areas on the field. And like you said, Claypool. I like Claypool, and I think those Steelers will bring somebody in the draft as well. I think they're going to look around how to replace that. In single quarterback leagues right now, he went straight up for David Montgomery. I would do that.
Yeah, I would. I think just based on the value of wide receiver over a running back long term, you take that. Look, I think David Montgomery's going to have a great year. I really do. I think Deontay Johnson's liable to have an even better one. So I think that is his value, though. I don't know if I would go much higher than a David Montgomery, because you did mention, look, the quarterback thing has to be a concern. The GM came out today basically saying, hey, we're lukewarm on Roethlisberger. I don't have the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, hey, we're not sure what's going to happen. Anything could happen, blah, blah, blah. So we don't know who the quarterback's going to be next year. And if you tell me it's going to be one of the backups that's on the roster right now, yeah, I'm not excited about anybody on that receiving core. That's a huge detriment. Look, I think they're in a position. Yeah, you're absolutely right. They're going to draft somebody in the third or fourth round that's going to end up being a stud, because that's exactly what they've done the past 3 or 4 years. I mean, I think Tylan Wallace is a good spot. Like, he could go there, play in the spot, and just be awesome for the Steelers for a couple of years. Look, I think you hit the nail on the head. Are there any other trades that you could talk about? Like, I'd love to.
There's a good one. There's a juicy one for single quarterback, and that's Joe Mixon. Straight up for Joe Mixon. So in a single quarterback league, would you trade Deontay Johnson for Joe Mixon? Man, that is a hell of a value deal. I'm still sticking with Mixon.
Yeah, I hate myself, but I'm sticking with Mixon too.
Yeah, because I would give up Monty, because I have less faith in Monty. I think he's hit his ceiling. I don't think we've seen Mixon's ceiling yet. But again, he's got to produce, right? We've been talking about Mixon producing for 3 years now. But I think it's going to be his year next year. I have more faith in Mixon having probably a better 2 years than Deontay Johnson. I don't have more faith in Montgomery having a better 2 years than Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, for me, no, I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, so that's single quarterback. Now, in Superflex, some juicy ones here. So what about Deontay Johnson? And again, when we're looking at this, straight up for Keenan Allen.
Oh, I take Keenan Allen all day, 100%. Yeah, I think that's an easy one for me.
Yeah, I think that's easy too, because the quarterbacks, if they get Herbert for the next 3 years, Keenan Allen's going to be able to outproduce that. Yeah. Keenan Allen is the most underrated damn receiver. He gets so screwed out there, and just he gets underrated. He gets targets. I know he doesn't score all the time, but I think with Herbert there, it'll change. But they went straight up. So someone believes in Deontay that much, they traded Keenan Allen. I get Dynasty. I get it.
Go target Keenan Allen. I'm sorry, because I get Dynasty, and you're looking long haul. The age is definitely a factor, but man, Keenan Allen's going to be really good for a while. And the thing about Keenan Allen is he might be one of the best route runners in the league. I mean, just Chad Johnson was talking about it on the Bustin' with the Boys podcast the last week or something, and he's talking about how Keenan Allen is just pristine, amazing route runner. And I'll listen to him when it comes to stuff like that. So yeah, I think Keenan Allen. Go buy Keenan Allen just in general. Like that's a bad name for you to throw at me, because I think Herbert has this ceiling, and I think Keenan Allen is just tops of the tops for me as far as a buy. So that's a bad one, but I'd like to hear some other ones.
No, I'm taking Keenan Allen in that deal. I mean, that is what it is, and especially, but that good way, dynasty guys out there that play. I think sometimes we get held up on the age thing. I think a good way to improve your team sometimes is take a guy like Deontay Johnson and try to go get Keenan Allen if you're a contender, or if you're in that fringe for 2 or 3 years, right? And just try to get those guys out there. I think that's a great way, a great strategy to build your team. Another one that, again, he got paired with somebody here, and so it makes the value a little bit different, but Deontay Johnson and Terry McLaurin from Washington for Alvin Kamara.
Wow.
Very close.
Yeah.
And again, Superflex League, PPR.
I'll say this: Terry McLaurin has more value than Deontay Johnson to me, and that's just a personal thing. But I would rather have Terry McLaurin straight up. I would keep Terry McLaurin and Deontay Johnson over a Kamara, and part of that is like I'm just so jaded by the running backs. Like I've seen a running back be successful for 3 or 4 years. Okay, well the drop off's coming because it seems to always come after 3 or 4 years. So like that's kind of where I'm at with running backs. And you mentioned it. Look, my basic strategy for Dynasty, and I think some people just overthink the Dynasty aspect of trading. Think 3 years. That's it. Like that's all I'm only worried about 3. You can't predict what's going to happen in 5 years. Maybe if you're talking quarterback, you can think that for quarterback. You can make a trade for Patrick Mahomes because you're going to have him for the next 12 years. That's fine. But when you're talking about skill positions, especially running backs and wide receivers, just think 3 years. Are they going to be there? Is there a possibility of a drop off for me? There is a possibility of a drop off for Kamara in 3 years. I think the sky's the limit for the other two. So I would take the wide receivers there.
Yeah, no, I think I would too. I'm a zero running back guy, so all my zero running back get the hell out of here because that's me. You know me. So I agree with the Deontay Johnson-McLaurin. It's hard not to take Kamara. If you're a contender, I could see you giving up those two guys for Kamara for one last year. I just worry about that quarterback situation. Who the hell is going to be the quarterback? Is it Jameis? Is it going to be Taysom Hill? Is it? Because if it is, geez, I'm worried about my Kamara shares. So I would agree with you. As far as his overall value, to me, he's worth the first-round pick in the later half. If it's a single quarterback league, I will give up a first-round pick for Deontay Johnson. I was trying to do that last year, and I couldn't. He was too pricey. I think his price has gone down now, so I think you can do it.
Yeah. I think there's only one wide receiver as far as the rookie wide receivers coming in that I'd rather have, and that's Jamar Chase. Yeah. So everybody else, if you're in a position where it's like, you're going to get one of those guys, and that an Etienne or Harris are probably going to be off the board. If it's that range, I'd move it for Deontay Johnson for sure.
No, that's good. All right, now our third guy. So for us, this guy's an interesting guy, and this is Chris Godwin, Tampa Bay Bucks, free agent-ish, right? They said they're bringing him back, but we don't know for sure. Godwin finished as the 31 ranked PPR quarterback, wide receiver, not quarterback. That'd be a hell of a feat. 15, almost just under 16, basically fantasy points a game. But he was hit and miss. When you look at his splits in PPR, he obviously missed some games this season. He had some games where he had, he's 18, 17, 15. He had some kind of 7-point games, 8, 9-point games. And so he was kind of hit and miss for us. So essentially he's around that wide receiver 3, which you probably draft him as your wide receiver 2. And some crazy people probably draft him as their wide receiver 1 out there. So you definitely took a hit for his value. I don't necessarily love Chris Godwin. But if he goes somewhere else, I'd probably love him a little bit more because Tampa just seems like with that offense with Brady, he swings it around too much. What do you think of Godwin?
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. And first of all, I want to say I don't think it matters to me where he goes. And the other part of this, let me take a step back, actually. I think with Godwin, you have an interesting opportunity to get people that are maybe a little bit emotional about maybe picking up Godwin last year and thinking he's going to have this awesome year, which he was set up to have, and obviously injuries and other things kind of took it away from him. I think Godwin is a wide receiver 1. So I think if he goes to another team, like I think he's been rumored to like a Raiders, and like we talked about the Raiders earlier, as far as like not a fantasy, destination that you get excited for. But if he goes to another team, I think I like him even more. So that's a first step. It's not like, if he gets traded, man, where's he going to go? That's a question mark. I would love it if he goes somewhere else. Even if he stays with the Bucks, he's a buy for me. If he is healthy, he's going to get 1,100 yards in my opinion. I think that's kind of where he'll end up if he plays 16 games. Didn't do it this year. Got hurt. That happens. That is what it is. I love Godwin. I think he's one of the bigger buys of the 5 guys we're talking about. I think he's the biggest buy. I would go out and spend some value on him and go out and get him because I do think he is still on his upward trend. I think talent-wise, when we're talking just pure talent, he is a legit top 15 wide receiver in the league. I think he's that good. I'm very high on him as a player, and I just have to believe my whole mantra is the talent carries over to production. And that's it doesn't always work out perfectly, but that's always been my thing, and it works out more often than it doesn't, I feel like.
Okay, I think what makes me nervous about Godwin, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, for the Bucks, is that Mike Evans last season he had 131 targets. Mike Evans isn't going to go away. Rob Gronkowski had 91 targets. Rob freaking Gronkowski had 91 targets. Antonio Brown had 72 targets. And again, that's when they brought him in, right, in the year. And so if they bring Antonio Brown back, I think that hurts Godwin's value if Godwin does come back. Cameron Brate had 53 targets. You still have Tyler Johnson, right? So when we think about Tyler Johnson out there, O.J. Howard, if he comes back and he's there, if he's healthy, I know the O.J. Howard guys are out there. So they spread the ball around a ton. I understand what you're taking because Godwin had 116 targets and he missed a ton of games. So in reality, he probably would have finished maybe as the target 1 they probably would have finished at wide receiver 1 for targets had he stayed healthy. So I get where you're coming from with Godwin. I just worry about Brady and his ability to throw it around. Do you worry about that at all and the talent they have on that roster?
Yeah, listen, I do get that, and that's a totally fair point. I think you look at, his targets in games that he played in, versus Atlanta, he got 7, versus Detroit, he gets 9, versus the Rams, he gets 10. Consistently getting a bunch of targets. I'm looking at his targets from the 2020 season. There's one game where he had three or less targets. That was against the Vikings and a blowout win. So, yeah, the average looks like, there's one game with 5, one game with 3. The rest are 6 and above. So yeah. I'm not super worried about targets. I think, you talking about that. You talked about a lot of guys that played every game and Godwin didn't. Obviously, Mike Evans had his injuries as well. So that's definitely a good point. I don't know if he ends up being the target leader, but I think if you pay him, because you're going to have to pay him this year, he deserves a contract. All right. So if the Bucs are able to pay him, if they do, you're not going to not give this guy the ball. Like you're not paying him to get the 3rd most targets on your team or 4th most targets on your team. If he's healthy, he's going to have either number 1 or number 2. And look, we've seen it happen enough times where a team that passes the ball a lot can support 2 legit fantasy wide receiver options. And look, I don't think it's crazy to say, it's maybe unlikely, but I don't think it's crazy to say that Godwin could come into next year with the Bucs and be the wide receiver 1 on his team as far as fantasy production goes. So Mike Evans is awesome. He gets a lot of the red zone targets and stuff, so that definitely takes away from that. But I don't think it's crazy to say that's a possibility. So yeah, I get the concern. To me, I'll buy from people that are worried about that. Because like right now, I think it's a perfect time to buy because I do think he's going. I don't think the Bucs keep him. I think the Bucs would probably rather keep the linebacker. I'm blanking on his name right now. That's on the other side of the ball. God, I wish I could remember his name.
We don't talk about the other side of the ball. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about defense.
I'm mad at myself. I'm blanking on his name. But the awesome linebacker they have that's there. I think they'd probably rather pay him and keep the defense up because they have, like you said, they have a bunch of good players. Yeah. I like Tyler Johnson. I thought he popped a little bit this past year. Maybe they're willing to put him in a bigger position, bigger chunk of the offense. You didn't even mention Scotty Miller who can get in there. So that's why I don't think the Bucs are going to keep him. And I'm on board for wherever he goes. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1. I think he's getting over 100 targets wherever he goes. I'm here for it. Maybe I'm too high on him. Maybe this is just my guy, and I'm hyped for him. I'll go buy based off of your concern, though. I really will.
Well, I think you buy him now, right, before he gets to another team. Like if you're going to do it, you got to do it now.
Time to buy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for me, in a single quarterback league, here's some trades that went down. He went straight up for Derrick Henry.
Shit.
That's a tough one.
I just mentioned 3 years. Like, I think Derrick Henry. Like, I know he's had awesome production, and like it feels like a down year is coming for Derrick Henry. But man, that whole team revolves around Derrick Henry. As long as he stays healthy, he's going to be the dude there. I keep Derrick Henry, but it's close. That's the value right there.
If you can get Derrick Henry for just Chris Godwin, I would probably do it. I would have a hard time thinking there's got to be. If I'm trading Derrick Henry, I'm getting the first or something back with Chris Godwin. So if whoever got that deal, that's a good job. Chris Godwin for Miles Sanders, I think that's a little bit more fair.
Slam dunk. If you have Miles Sanders. If you have Miles Sanders, you package a pick to go get Godwin, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I would be willing to do that for sure.
Okay, yeah, I think I still lean Sanders because I still have I have a soft spot for my life in Sanders because I think the way that the running back situation looks, I would rather have Sanders, who is borderline running back 1. If he's my running back 2, he has that ceiling. Whereas Godwin, he finished as a wide receiver 3. I think Godwin's ceiling is a wide receiver 2. So when I'm looking at but that's just because I don't believe in Godwin as much as you do, right? Like I
would disagree with that. I think his ceiling is absolutely wide receiver 1. So that's a difference in value. Hey, that's good. I'm glad we had at least one guy that we can fundamentally disagree on.
But yeah, I mean, we're better, right? Like I would rather have Sanders. I think I'm a zero running back guy, but I do value running backs. Like I'm not one of those dudes out here that's rolling out Myles Gaskin the first week of the season until their injuries happen, right? I do value them. But I think that is an interesting deal. Now, as far as Superflex goes, I saw this deal, and it was an interesting deal. So non-tight end premium, he went straight up for George Kittle. So Chris Godwin for George Kittle. Straight up, non-tight end premium. I still think I want Kittle because I think Kittle is the Dynasty tight end 1 going forward.
I'm not gonna lie. I've had Kittle in one of my it's a keeper league, but it's a little, similar.
Yeah.
I've been my keeper for the past 2 years now, and he's been hurt like the past 2 years, and I feel like he's been a big reason I flame out in the playoff the past 2 years. So I'm a little bit lower on Kittle based solely on personal experience. Like, it has nothing to do with the player, and it's just injury. You know, that's all it is. When he's on the field, he's awesome. I get that trade. I do, because Kittle, I mean, realistically, gonna be a tight end, like literally the tight end 1 or 2 over the next 2 or 3 years, like as long as he's healthy. So I definitely get that value. If you feel good about your wide receiver position, I get that for sure.
And then the other one was, and we'll be this a little quicker, is they paired Nick Chubb and Godwin, and they traded for Christian McCaffrey.
I'd rather have Chubb and Godwin.
Oh, look at you. Yeah, I think, gosh, it'd be very close for me, because if McCaffrey is in PPR, if McCaffrey's healthy, he's a cheat code. He is just a cheat code, and he can score, and he's in a tier above himself. But he's got to be healthy. If Teddy Bridgewater comes back, who I don't really like, I love Chubb, so this is a harder one for me. I would probably lean.
You love him? Sorry, I missed that.
I love Chubb. I love my boy Nick Chubb. But I would probably lean a little bit McCaffrey on this deal, just because of what I've seen for what he did for my teams 2 years ago. But I don't hate it. I don't hate the Chubb and Godwin side. I think that's a very good value that you got there.
Yeah, no, I 100% get the McCaffrey side of that. And if you make that trade, I don't hate it either. A small thing that should only be mentioned like this much is just worth pointing out. I've heard rumors of him going to Houston for along with 3 firsts for Watson and stuff. I don't think that'll ever happen or anything, but it's like, man, if he's a part of trade rumors, whether that's real or not, like that's a funny anecdotal thing that would definitely cross my mind if I'm in that situation.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about my guy Juju. So Juju Smith-Schuster. Okay. This guy, it gets just crapped on this last year. And he's only 24. We act like he's 30. He finished as wide receiver 17 in PPR formats. And last year, that's a great value if you had drafts last year, because you were getting him in the 4th, 5th round as probably your wide receiver 2 or 3. So technically, he really equaled his own production. And so I agree. I like Juju. I think he's a big buy for me. We'll get into it. And obviously, we'll see that in here. But what do you think of Juju?
As far as a player, I think he's a great player. I really do. I think he's a complete player. I do think, his athletic profile leads me to believe that he's more of like a top end wide receiver 2 in the NFL. So I'm not talking fantasy for a second. Just as an NFL player, he's going to do best when he has another guy on the other side of him. That's just from an athletic profile. I think he can be the wide receiver 1, and if a team believes in him this year and pays him to be that, I'll be interested to see what happens. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, that's a bad idea or anything. That's not where I'm at. I really do like Juju. I think he's a great player. I think the value is going to be interesting. I'm not sure exactly what I would do with him, because the big thing is, where's he going to go? I don't feel the same way as I do about Godwin. Like I mentioned, Godwin is I don't care where he goes. I think he's going to be good no matter what, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that I feel that way about Juju. There's some landing spots where I'm going to be like, man, I don't know about that. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm much more curious about what your value is for him. As far as a player, awesome player, can be. I think his ceiling, again, is wide receiver 1, bottom end wide receiver 1, top end wide receiver 2 in fantasy. I think that's his ceiling. Can he get there? We'll see.
When you look at his numbers, like I said, he got the targets last year, 128. He had 97 catches. Everybody act like out here that he wasn't producing, and he was. I think people just don't like his dancing and all his other stuff that happened, and he kind of had that negative impact there. He had 9 touchdowns on the year. And when you look at his games, he had 5 games under 10 catches, which isn't great. Like when we're talking about this, I understand that you want it to be a little bit more consistent. But when you look at his trades, as far as where he's at, I would probably give up a late first too for him. Like if I'm going to give up a late first for Deontay, I have no really problem giving up a late first for Juju. Really, the only reason why is because the draft class, in my opinion, isn't as great as everybody kind of has made it out to be. I want Chase. And after that, I think I would rather have Juju, to be 100 honest with you, as far as the wide receivers go. Now, as far as single quarterback, where his value is, so someone traded Juju for Brandon Cooks and a first.
Brandon Cooks and a first. I'll take Brandon Cooks and a first over Juju. I would. Yeah.
I think Cooks is a little bit too pricey for me. Like if for me, if I'm gonna get Juju, I'm not adding Brandon Cooks in that deal. I'll give up a first and give up something else. Like I will try to find a receiver out there. Yeah. Maybe like someone like Paris Campbell. As much as I love Paris Campbell, you put in Paris Campbell into that first, a little bit less risk for you. Okay, I will do that deal. So that's kind of my mindset where he's at in terms of that. Other than that, he went for Ronald Jones on a first. I would do Juju for that.
Yeah, I think I would too, because Ronald Jones to me is like, Ronald Jones is a dime a dozen kind of guy for me. Like I'm not sitting here like, oh man, I gotta have him on fantasy. He'll have good weeks, but beyond that, I'm not sitting here thinking I need him. I would probably do that for sure. As far as like my value, and we'll get back to this just for a second, but you mentioned you'd rather have it's Chase and then Juju for you. I think for me, it's Chase, Waddle, and Smith. And then Juju. I think I would take any one of those three, and then I would probably rather have Juju. You mentioned the wide receiver class. I just want to mention that for a second. I absolutely agree. I think after you get out of the top 4 or 5, depending on your take of those, that 4th or 5th receiver, I think you have a lot of guys that are going in the 2nd and 3rd round that deserve to go in the 2nd, 3rd round that could go either way in the NFL. Like, you don't know. You know what I mean? Like, could be J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, could be, Brown or A.J. Brown or something like that. Yeah. So I absolutely agree as far as that type of value. I think, a little bit different, but for the most part, I do agree. Back to the picks. I just wanted to throw that value take in there for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think Waddle for me is very close because I really like Waddle. He's my wide receiver too. So that'd be very close for me. I don't know if I don't know if I could pull the trigger on that. If I could get Waddle, I might just take that just because I like his potential. So that's a good call for you. After that, though, I think that he's there. I think his price is really low right now, but I think it's hard to go buy him because I think the guys that have him like I do are like, bro, I'm not taking – someone traded James Conner and Damian Harris for him. That is ridiculous. If you can get him for that, then yeah. But if someone sent me that offer, I would send the douche pickle trade offer back to him and say, no, that's a terrible offer. I'm not doing that. But what do you think about this one? So Austin Eckler, and this isn't a super flex league, Austin Eckler and Juju for Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, I take CEH. I probably do. That's close. That's close to me. And I know you're going to be against this. You're not as high on CEH as I am. Yeah. That's fine. I think CEH is like, because he did get injured and everything. I understand it's a pass first football team. I think the Super Bowl kind of showed like, hey man, y'all were hitting like 6-7 yards a clip on running the ball. Why didn't you keep doing that? Yeah. So I do think the value for CEH is there for me to take a Juju. I am higher on CEH in fantasy than a lot of people though, so that's fair to say. I totally understand the other side of it though.
I mean, I think Eckler can be a running back 1, and
I get that too. I don't think he has much longer in that kind of in those shoes for me as far as like dynasty value maybe this year, but I also think the Chargers are going to spend the Chargers are going to be the team that gets like a Javonte Williams or a Kenneth Gainwell or something. Like I feel like that they're going to be targeting that like tier 2 of running backs and whatever that's for them. So I would think that there's going to be another guy in that building that's going to be taking away from Eckler. That again is just a personal take and just a projection for me. So I could be wrong on that, but that's kind of where I'm at with Eckler.
As someone who I know the draft classes from this year. If you're thinking that. I think Eckler has more talent than running backs in this class and next year's class, unless you're talking about Breece Hall and unless you're talking about, Isaiah Spiller from Texas A&M. But after that, the tiers it gets weird. Now, 2023, that class is filled. That class is where you want to buy because that running back class is there. So I think I would just take Eckler's production over that just because I think that he can at least still give you a running back 2-ish, ceiling running back 1. And CH, you and me know you love CH. I'm not. That's just not going to be my guy. It just isn't what it is. But I think Juju for me is that first round. I do. I will actively get it. Now you're going to have to pair him with someone. Paris Campbell, maybe Henry Ruggs, right? Maybe would you do a first Henry Ruggs for Juju, or would you take the other side?
I'd take the other side. I would. I'd take the Henry Ruggs upside. I would. I think Juju. Like I mentioned the ceiling, but I think most reasonably he's going to be like a wide receiver 2 guy, and that's fine in fantasy. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But I think you take the Henry Ruggs in the first. I think the upside of a Henry Ruggs is like, man, he could be a top 5 receiver in the NFL. Like he could be. I don't know if he'll ever be that, but he has that potential.
And you could always pair, like, let's say Mike Williams, right, from the Chargers. Like, let's say, okay, how do I pair first with him? Just try to – I think you got to pair him with something.
That's a good one. I think that's really the conversation. You pair a guy who's middle of the road wide receiver and a first for a Juju, who maybe if the Juju owner thinks that Juju's a middle of the road wide receiver, then you're getting a lot of value. You mentioned Paris Campbell. I'm huge on Paris Campbell. Wouldn't want to move him because the value's not there right now. But in general, like a Mike Williams, perfect example. Mike Williams in a first for a Juju, I think that's a slam dunk, and I could do that for a lot of different teams. The number 2 wide receiver on most teams, I'd probably do it like a Preston Williams and a first for Juju. Yeah, that's awesome. And Preston Williams has a lot of upside. Got injured this year, but it's been good when he's on the field. I think even Devontae Parker in a first. If you really think the Patriots or the Dolphins are going to draft a top wide receiver and things like that, that might be something I would consider. It really is. So that would be my range.
That's where his value's at, guys. I think that's where he's at, really, in super flex leagues, where he's at. Even in single quarterback leagues, that's kind of where I have him. Our last guy is an interesting guy, and he came back from the dead, and that's Antonio Brown. And he was someone that I got for a 4th-round pick last year, and he helped me get second place in the league. Unfortunately, I didn't win it, but he helped me get that. And so his value's all across the board. I think he's going to come back, and I think that he'll be back on the Bucs. But Antonio Brown's value, if you're a contender, you could use him. When we were talking about Antonio Brown, he finished as wide receiver 91 in PPR formats, but you got to also remember he didn't play the first 8 weeks of the season. So he basically finished as wide receiver 91 after he only played for 9 weeks. So actually, when you're looking at that from that perspective, when we take it and we take the weeks from 9 to 16 and we look at kind of where he finished, Antonio Brown basically finished as wide receiver 41. So you put that in perspective, wide receiver 4, obviously, in that category, but maybe if he would have played the whole year, he could finish as a wide receiver 3. So what do you think of Antonio Brown? Where are you at with him?
Yeah, I would trade him. I would. I think the value is going to be there. You go look at his targets, and they're actually pretty good. You got 14 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, 5 targets, 3 targets, 13 targets, 8 targets, and 5 targets in his 9 games. And that was just, right down the list of his targets per game. So you kind of have to like that, right? Like those numbers sounded pretty good. One week where he had 3 targets, everything else was 5 or better. Yeah, that's positive. I can see buying him. I can. I would sell. I would sell off the Super Bowl hype. I would try and get as much value as I could for him. If I could get, is this bold? Tell me. But I would consider a second and a Paris Campbell for an Antonio Brown. Now I'm high on Paris Campbell. I really like Paris Campbell. I think the only reason he hasn't, become a household name is because of injuries. I think that's the only reason. I'm still holding on to that belief in Paris Campbell. So take that with the conversation. But I think I would do that if I was in a position where I had Antonio Brown, thought I could get younger and also get a second for some value.
Yeah, if I could do that and get those guys, I think I would. I would move Antonio Brown for a second right now, and either in single quarterback and super flex for sure. But even if I'm contending, I think I move Brown. I don't think Brown's value is holding. I think it's fake, right? Like we talked, like the GameStop stock, right? There's not a lot of depth there. There's just not a lot of value there. So if I can move those guys, and that's essentially, I went through all the trades. It's really a second right now. I mean, that's basically what it is. Super flex or non-super flex. Second is pretty much what you can get. Somebody had to pair him and Logan Thomas together to get a second. I can see that. I mean, Logan and him basically, I think, feel like they have the same value as a second. If I'm buying that, if I'm getting Antonio Brown, I probably personally wouldn't give up anything more than the third. That's kind of what my personal. Now, could you get that? Maybe you might, because some Antonio Brown owners out there might say, "Oh yeah, third is basically what I can get for him." So my personal value is a third. I think you might be able to get a second for him, but you must move him now. This is if you're. Or he's going to die in your roster. He's a dynasty clogger. He's going to clog that roster. So for me, that's where I have him at.
So is there any value for a team that's like, man, I'm awesome, I'm doing good. I want a guy who's experienced that I can put on my bench and be a legit dude that I can throw in at times and just kind of is there a move there? Do you support that move for the guy who's like, man, I don't know that a second or third round wide receiver is going to help me this year. I think Antonio Brown would. Is that an argument you would make for guys thinking about buying him?
The argument I would make is that you're going to get maybe wide receiver 3, and for that price, you could do it. Or like this trade, Antonio Brown for McCole Hardman. I would probably do that trade. And McCole Hardman is.
I'll take McCole Hardman for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably move him and say, okay, hopefully I get McCole. Maybe McCole turns into something. If he goes somewhere else, maybe he can kind of do that. Now, another one, he did go for a 4th. If you can get him for a 4th, I'm okay with that. Like, hey, you can get him as a wide receiver 3 or 4, maybe put him in there. I just think we just talked about Godwin and all the targets. If Godwin does leave, though, his value will increase, right? So if Godwin does go, I think Antonio Brown may have that role. Well, I think Tyler Johnson will take a little bit of those targets, but I still think his value goes up a little bit.
I will say, first of all, I do think Godwin goes. And second of all, I don't know if his value goes up that much more because he's still he was the guy getting the targets near the line of scrimmage and trying to make the most out of it. You talk about like 5 receptions. Well, that's actually a good week. 4 receptions for 35 yards. He's getting the targets. He had 14 targets for 11 receptions for 138 yards. That was his big week. But he's still averaging 12 yards per reception. So it's that's kind of like he's a near the line of scrimmage wide receiver for the most part. Obviously, runs routes. He's a good guy, good player. I don't know how much that target share really increases if Godwin goes up. I think if Godwin leaves, that bumps him up for sure. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm saying I think it's more likely, like you said, that Tyler Johnson, Scotty Miller, they get more of a bump for me in that offense than a Antonio Brown would, in my opinion. That would be my initial assessment of if Godwin left. I wouldn't overvalue a Antonio Brown if he leaves. And also, hey, maybe somebody else does though, and maybe that creates more trade value for him. I don't know.
Yeah, I think as far as optimizing your most value for him, it's a risk. I think if you trade him now, it's the safe play. I think if you wait for Godwin and maybe Godwin leaves, then people are like, oh, he could be the guy and he comes back. I think that's the more risky play, but it could lead to more value. It's all about what risk you want to take. As a dynasty owner, I don't mind risks. I actually like taking risks because I'm a gambler. I like gambling. I'll go in there and I don't mind taking some shots. And so it just depends on some guy, right? So some guy hey, if I got him for a 4th, I don't mind holding off and maybe trying to get a 2nd. If I have to get a 3rd anyway, okay, that's fine. So it's based on what I bought it for.
Let me ask you this: who's going in the 3rd or 4th round of fantasy drafts? I'm trying to put a real name to a trade for Antonio Brown. Obviously, it's never going to sound good because a lot of these guys are college guys. Their name isn't going to be as big. But Amon-Ra is. I'm kind of thinking I would rather have Amon-Ra St. Brown than Antonio Brown. But after that, I would probably start to lean towards Antonio Brown. So I can give some names out, like Diami Brown from North Carolina. I'd probably want Brown more than I would want Antonio. Yeah, he's an interesting guy, but I don't think I would. Sorry, continue.
Well, what about Seth Williams from Auburn? Who would you rather have?
I'm not big on Seth Williams. I'm not. That's just me. I'd rather have Antonio Brown for sure, but that's my assessment.
Sage Surratt from Wake Forest, Tutu Atwell. These guys like that. That's generally what you're going to be at. That's your level.
Yeah, Tutu Atwell, I think has some upside, but again, he's going to be a gadget guy. That's interesting. I think all of those guys, I'd rather have Antonio Brown than, but one of those guys is probably going to hit and probably going to be something. You never know who it'll be, but those are lottery tickets. Those aren't any sure thing or anything like that. Yeah,
so I think that's where his value's at. I think I think that if you were content, you'd buy him. I'm not actively trying to buy him on the 2 rosters. I have him. I'm going to gamble. Hope that his value increases a little bit. Get me a 2nd so I can get in that Amon-Ra area. Even maybe, hey, for example, maybe, I don't really like Tony, but even Amari Rodgers, Elijah Moore, those kind of rookies, if I can sneak in there and grab those guys, or shoot, you might be able to trade him for a Paris Campbell or someone that's been awfully injured and that maybe you have it. Maybe Travis Fulgham. I think that's bad, but if you're going to get younger, you maybe could get another lightning in a bottle with Fulgham. Those type of guys. I think that's where I'm at. So again, these all are, we wanted to bring some guys that maybe not everybody was talking about that maybe can increase value for your dynasty. Let us know in the comments below what you think. Who would you be buying? Who would you be selling? As always, if you liked what we gave you guys, please, hit that like button, subscribe button if you can. And we appreciate you joining us. John, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no,
appreciate it. Did you get all that? If not, make sure you head over to Hammercast.com, subscribe, and join the Hammer Nation. Until next time, keep grinding.